In today's video, we will be diving deeply into Daniel Kahneman's masterpiece Thinking, Fast and Slow, a transformative book that explores the inner workings of our minds and uncovers the hidden mechanisms that influence our decisions. This is a book that examines the cognitive processes that shape our reality, showing us how we think, why we make certain choices, and, most importantly, how those choices are often irrational. Across its pages, Kahneman presents a compelling argument that our minds are far more complicated than we realize. Through years of groundbreaking research, Kahneman introduces the concept of two distinct systems of thinking that govern our everyday decisions: System 1 and System 2. These systems represent the fast and slow modes of thought that interplay throughout our lives, influencing everything from mundane choices to life-altering decisions. First, we need to understand these two systems of thinking in great depth, as this is the foundational framework of Kahneman's argument. System 1 is what Kahneman calls the fast, intuitive, and automatic part of our brain. This is the type of thinking we engage in without conscious effort. It allows us to instantly recognize faces, make snap decisions, and operate in environments that we are familiar with. Imagine walking into a crowded room and immediately recognizing a friend from across the space. You don't need to think about it or consciously analyze the features of their face. Your brain does this automatically, thanks to System 1. This system is evolutionary, designed to help us navigate the world quickly and efficiently, especially in situations where survival instincts are paramount. System 1, however, is not infallible. While it allows us to process information quickly, it also relies heavily on shortcuts, or heuristics, that can lead to biases and errors in judgment. These mental shortcuts evolved to help us deal with overwhelming amounts of information and to make decisions swiftly, but they often lead us astray. For example, let's consider a simple everyday experience. You hear rustling in the bushes during a walk in the park. Your brain, through System 1, immediately jumps to conclusions. It could be an animal or a person. Without thinking too deeply, you may feel a sense of unease, automatically assuming it's something threatening, even though the sound could easily be the wind or a harmless creature. This is System 1 at work, fast, reactive, and sometimes prone to overreaction or misjudgment because it doesn't consider all the variables. System 2, on the other hand, is the slower, more deliberate, and logical mode of thinking. When you sit down to solve a complex math problem, when you weigh the pros and cons of a significant life decision, or when you engage in careful reasoning, this is System 2 in action. Unlike System 1, which operates on autopilot, System 2 requires conscious effort and concentration. Think about a time when you were learning to drive a car. Initially, every action, steering, checking mirrors, monitoring speed, required your full attention. That's System 2 engaging in an unfamiliar task. With practice, driving becomes second nature, and many of these tasks shift into the realm of System 1, where you no longer need to think about them actively. This shift from slow, deliberate thinking to fast, automatic responses is how System 1 and System 2 interact. The interplay between these two systems explains a lot about human behavior. System 1 is quick and efficient, but because it operates on limited information and heuristics, it often jumps to conclusions. System 2 is more accurate and reliable but requires much more energy and focus, which means we don't engage it as often as we should. We tend to rely on System 1 for most of our daily decisions because it's less taxing on our cognitive resources, but this reliance comes at a cost. When we allow System 1 to dominate, we're more likely to fall prey to cognitive biases, systematic errors, and thinking that distort our understanding of reality. Kahneman provides numerous examples of how these cognitive biases manifest in everyday life. One of the most striking is the availability heuristic. This cognitive bias occurs when we judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. For instance, after hearing about a plane crash on the news, we might overestimate the risk of flying because the image of the crash is vivid and easy to recall. This is despite the fact that air travel remains statistically one of the safest forms of transportation. The availability heuristic skews our perception of risk because our minds give more weight to the things we can easily remember or imagine, even if they are rare or unlikely. Another fascinating bias that Kahneman explores is the representativeness heuristic. This occurs when we make judgments about people or situations based on how closely they fit a particular stereotype. For example, If you meet someone who is shy and loves reading, you might be tempted to think they are more likely to be a librarian than a lawyer, simply because their characteristics fit your mental model of what a librarian is like. However, statistically, there are far more lawyers than librarians in the world, so the odds are greater that this person is a lawyer. This mental shortcut can lead to errors in reasoning because it ignores base rates, the actual probability of something happening, and focuses instead on surface-level characteristics. One of the most important contributions of thinking, fast and slow, is Kahneman's exploration of loss aversion, which is a central component of his prospect theory. Loss aversion refers to our tendency to feel the pain of losses more acutely than we experience the pleasure of equivalent gains. In other words, losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. This asymmetry has a profound impact on decision-making, particularly in financial contexts. People are often risk-averse when it comes to potential gains. They prefer a guaranteed smaller reward over a risky larger one, but become risk-seeking when it comes to avoiding losses. This helps explain why investors often hold onto losing stocks for too long, hoping for a recovery, even when it would be more rational to cut their losses and move on. Another concept that Kahneman delves into is the idea of anchoring, a cognitive bias that occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we encounter when making decisions. For example, if you're negotiating the price of a car and the seller initially asks for $30,000, that figure serves as an anchor, shaping your perception of what a fair price should be. Even if you manage to negotiate the price down to $27,000, you might feel like you've gotten a good deal because your brain is anchored to the initial $30,000 price point, even though the car may be worth much less. Anchoring affects not only financial decisions but also judgments about people, situations, and even our self-assessments. Kahneman also introduces the concept of what you see is all there is, WISITI, which explains why we often make decisions based on incomplete information. Our brains are wired to focus on the information that is immediately available to us, often disregarding or underestimating the importance of what we don't know. This leads to overconfidence in our judgments because we fail to consider the gaps in our knowledge. For instance, when making a judgment about a political candidate based on a debate performance, we might form a strong opinion without taking into account other important factors, such as their track record, policy positions, or the broader context of their campaign. WISIATI is a powerful reminder that we should always be cautious about the conclusions we draw based on limited information, as our brains are prone to giving undue weight to the data that is right in front of us. One of the most striking aspects of Kahneman's research is his exploration of overconfidence, a cognitive bias that affects how we evaluate our own knowledge and abilities. Overconfidence leads us to believe that our judgments and predictions are more accurate than they really are. This bias is particularly common among experts, who may feel that their experience or expertise gives them a greater ability to predict outcomes, even in situations where outcomes are inherently uncertain. Kahneman's work shows that overconfidence is not just a personal flaw but a deeply ingrained feature of human cognition. Our brains prefer coherent, logical narratives, and we are often too quick to assume that we understand the causes of events, even when the reality is far more complex and unpredictable. Kahneman also introduces the concept of the experiencing self versus the remembering self, which highlights the difference between how we experience life in the moment and how we remember those experiences later. The experiencing self is the part of us that lives in the present, feeling emotions and sensations as they occur. The remembering self, on the other hand, constructs a narrative about those experiences which often doesn't align with how we felt in the moment. For example, a long, uneventful vacation might be perceived as boring while it's happening, but when you reflect on it later, the highlights stand out and the overall memory becomes more positive. This distinction has profound implications for how we make decisions about the future. We often base our choices on how we think we will remember an experience, rather than on how we will actually feel while living it. Understanding the difference between these two selves can help us make more informed decisions that align with our true preferences. Throughout Thinking, Fast and Slow, Kahneman provides not just an analysis of human cognition, but also practical insights into how we can improve our decision-making processes. One of his central arguments is that by becoming more aware of our cognitive biases and the limitations of our thinking, we can make better choices both in our personal lives and in society at large. For example, In fields like medicine, finance, and law, understanding how people think can lead to more effective policies and interventions. Kahneman's research has had a profound impact on economics, leading to the development of behavioral economics, a field that integrates psychological insights into economic theory to better explain human behavior. In the final chapters of the book, Kahneman explores the concept of thinking about thinking, the idea that we can train ourselves to recognize when we are relying too heavily on System 1 and learn to engage System 2 when it matters most. This doesn't mean abandoning our fast, intuitive thinking entirely. After all, System 1 is essential for navigating the world efficiently, but rather learning when to slow down and apply more deliberate, analytical reasoning. For example, in situations where the stakes are high, such as making important financial decisions or evaluating complex problems, we should be cautious of the mental shortcuts that System 1 offers and instead engage our slow, deliberate thinking to avoid errors in judgment. In sum, thinking, fast and slow, is a profound exploration of the human mind, offering insights that challenge many of our assumptions about how we think, decide, and act. It reveals that our decisions are often less rational than we believe, influenced by cognitive biases and mental shortcuts that operate below the surface of consciousness. Yet, by becoming aware of these biases, we can learn to mitigate their effects, making more thoughtful and informed choices. Whether we're dealing with decisions in our personal lives, our careers, or society as a whole, Kahneman's research offers invaluable tools for understanding our own minds and improving our decision-making processes. In the next segment, we will explore some practical applications of these ideas and see how Kahneman's insights can be applied to improve decision-making in a variety of fields, from personal finance to business strategy and beyond.